Paul Harrell, weekdays from 4 to 6. Learn more at paulharrell.com.
We've got Scott Richardson. Scott is running for state representative in a Republican primary against Representative Dan Douglas. It's District 91. Scott, welcome to the program, sir.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you could make it. So first of all, tell our listeners, District 91, what are we talking about geographically here?
Yeah, geographically, it's located within Benton County. It starts kind of on the northeast side, borders Bentonville, takes in a small portion of the city limits, runs across to Centerton, heads down towards Siloam Springs, brings in Cave City and Gravette and a few other small outlying towns, goes back over to the Interstate 49, runs up along the west side of Interstate 49, taking in a portion of Rogers, and then comes back around to meet on the south side of Bentonville.
Wow.
So fairly large geographic location, but lots of good folks out in that area.
So what makes you want to get into the ring, Scott? What made you want to do this?
So from a political perspective, I've had interest in politics throughout my life. I've participated in a variety of opportunities, but never ran for a public office. When I started listening to some of the challenges we have in District 91, and specifically some of the representation challenges that we have, it became very apparent that we needed a change in our representation here from this district, because our current representation doesn't represent the people that we have. We have a conservative body of people here, and the reality is my opponent's not he's not been challenged ever. He started this in 2012, and no one's come out and stepped forward. So I really think that from an education perspective, a lot of the voters, they see the Republican, they make the assumption that my opponent is a conservative at heart, and they vote for him based on that. But the reality is, without an opposition, without someone to step out there and say, "Listen, this voting record is not indicative of what a conservative stands for. This is not what we as a group of people really stand for," and so we need to make some adjustments in our representation. He's not had that yet. So my real challenge in this election cycle is to get the word out. Talk to people, tell them what's going on at our state level, what's going on with regard to how our representative continues to introduce new tax bills, trying to drive up our existing taxes, which is already astronomical, which is going to further stagnate our economic growth. And we're blessed here in the Northwest corridor with lots of economic development and growth, but we still have challenges with regard to that. And what would our economic growth really look like in this part of the world if we were to lower those taxes in a range that makes sense and stop trying to fund all of these outlying projects through additional taxes, and instead start working to fix our spending problem in this state and really work toward spending resolutions that make sense. So that's kind of how I got to this point, was thinking about all of the challenges that we have, the representation that doesn't represent the majority of the conservative base within this district, and how do we get from where we are to that point.
Wow, that's a really, really good answer. We're talking with Scott Richardson. He is a Republican candidate for District 91 in a Republican primary. And you were talking about how you don't think the current representing challenges is how you phrased it. And so I just I wonder, do you think that the primary is pretty much the general election now? I mean, Republicans, if you want to do anything in this state, would get political power of any kind for the most part, especially up in your neck of the woods. You got to have an R next to your name. And so, would you agree with that? This is kind of the general election. I mean, if you win this primary, there's a good chance that you're going to be serving in Little Rock.
And that's generally the consensus with most people. Well, obviously, we don't want to take anything for granted. There obviously is an opportunity for a Democrat to step forward and throw his hat in the ring, his or her hat, and try to make a run at it. The reality is, I'm not sure that representation would be that much different from a Democrat at this point. We do have a tendency to vote Republican in this part of the world, and that's a good thing. We're a conservative base of people. So if you're going to make an adjustment to your representation, you've got to do it. You really have to do it at the primary level.
So, so far, what's the reception been like as far as this? Is this challenge welcome? I mean, have you talked to folks who are well aware that Dan Douglas couldn't sponsor enough tax increases? I mean, whether it was the gas tax, the internet tax, or the other internet tax, and look how he voted with the tire tax and everything else. I mean, are people aware of what's actually going on in Little Rock right now?
Generally speaking, I've ran into both sides. There are a number of individuals that do follow close enough to understand what's going on, but by and large, the population doesn't really understand his voting record. They make the assumption that of course he's a Republican, so he should be voting in a conservative manner. And when you start talking about the challenges that exist in his voting record, you really do start opening some eyes. So far, the representation. Or I should say the feedback that I'm getting, the people are starting to have an eye-opening moment that this is a challenge that we have, and we need to make this change.
I'm going to ask you about a specific question or specific issue. He was the champion for the internet tax, and I've gone, an internet sales tax, and I call it a new sales tax. Whether he was supporting Jake Files, which was the unconstitutional version that would, allow Arkansas to claim sovereignty over a business in Indiana so that they owe a local tax that's going to support local infrastructure, or his personal one that he sponsored, which had to do with getting reporting, getting websites to report the activity, and then the state would go collect. Which that good luck with that one politically, but. His arguments for this were that there's this unfair advantage, that Main Street is bleeding, and somehow giving the government more money is going to save, is going to change the market and save small business. What's your reaction to his support of that and his arguments for it?
Well, the reality is it's from my perspective, and understand that I come from a technology background. I've been doing technology for 20 plus years, so I understand the range of challenges associated with trying to enforce regulation on the internet, and specifically trying to have taxes levied on specific types of purchases. And at best, it's a difficult challenge. You're always going to be, I think your enforcement level of that becomes significantly difficult across the board. But from a overall perspective, all that tax will do is effectively hurt the people who are spending money. These people are still going to spend that money, and they're still going to spend it on the internet. They're just going to be able to buy less of it. The argument that it hurts brick and mortar is an empty argument. It doesn't really hold water when you apply that to anything else that's going on from a taxing perspective. Brick and mortar companies from my perspective, are making a comeback because the economy is making a comeback. They're having difficulty because the economy is having difficulty. People that are purchasing items online are still going to purchase items online whether or not there's a tax on them. They're going to purchase things that are locally whether or not there's a tax on it. That's what they need locally. So from my perspective, it's an empty argument, and it doesn't hold water.
You're exactly right, and the fact is, we've got evidence of this already to prove his argument wrong, because Amazon has started collecting sales tax in Arkansas, and if his argument were true, we would have seen an uptick. We would have seen people be like, well, I'm not shopping on the internet anymore because now they're collecting tax. I might as well go out and go to the brick and mortar to buy it. That hasn't happened, and we've been doing this now for 6 months. You'd think there'd be this big increase, and so it is a phony argument. I feel like, and I'd love to hear your views. We're talking with Scott Richardson. He's running for Dan Douglas's seat in a Republican primary. I'd love to hear your views on limited government in general. And one of the other reasons I was so against this new tax on the internet, which it feels like a new tax. I mean, depending if you're talking about the use tax or the sales tax, the use tax we do technically owe. But
Sure.
I guess my question is, if we can stop the government from taking more money from us, that's money that they can't spend and use it to grow. What are your thoughts on that philosophy?
Well, our government is challenged across the board with a number of entitlements that we really can't afford, and really this all comes back to that kind of concept. We have to understand that taxation hurts the people involved at the lowest level, so it inflicts difficulties there, whether it be from a business perspective and stagnating their growth and their ability to move forward. It impacts the individuals that have to spend money and purchase goods. It reduces their ability and their purchasing authority and power, and therefore drives down overall business sales. So it impacts across the board. And we know this. There's been a number of studies in a variety of different places, including the Tax Foundation and several others, that indicate that the higher sales taxes are, the higher that your income taxes are, the more difficulty you're going to have in growing your economic presence. And right now, Arkansas lags behind the entire rest of the United States for the most part in our economic development. We've seen some good numbers lately, and I keep reminding people that's great. We need to see these good numbers, but that's just an indication of what's going on right now as an overall economy. It's not really a primary driver or indicator for Arkansas as a whole. And as we continue to grow big government, our debt to government continues to increase. So you have to evaluate the overall. And I'm not a person who's for zero taxes. That's not realistic. We have services that the government should provide, but they need to be minimal services. As the founding fathers intended, people should, for the most part, take care of their own lives. If tax is associated with bettering the playing field for the overall group or protection of the primary basic necessities of government, then we need to look at why those taxes exist and look at our opportunities for us to reduce the burden on the Arkansas folks. So that the reality is this is a returning investment, and it's been proven many times over that if you can reduce the tax burden, you're actually going to increase your overall revenue by growing the economy as a whole. Yeah. So it feeds itself and provides organic growth back into the overall government facility. But we need to be understanding of that takes time, and we need to develop that from an organic perspective and stop pushing entitlement programs and bigger government just for the sake of whatever entitlement we happen to be the flavor of.
Well, you just mentioned entitlements. I'd love to know your opinion on how this has all worked out with you had a Democrat governor, Mike Beebe, in 2013. You had Republican majorities. The Democrats, with the minority of Republicans, went ahead and expanded Obamacare here in Arkansas. And then you have Governor Hutchinson comes in. He keeps it, renames the program. We have a program that was supposed to only have 215,000 people on it. It's been as high as 320,000. It was way over projections. And this is a program primarily for able-to-work adults with no dependents. So how has this worked out, in your opinion?
It's difficult to defend it at this stage. I know that there are a number of legislators that continue to defend that it was the right choice. They use a couple of different arguments for it. It's the lesser of two evils, so to speak. We had an opportunity to bring in a significant amount of government money and take that and spend it in Arkansas, further driving the overall economic environment within the Arkansas borders. I understand the argument. The challenge that I have is that from an initial perspective, Medicaid, Obamacare, Arkansas Works, however you want to label it, it's insurance, and we have a challenge with this as Republicans. And I think we have to reevaluate our labeling for these programs. We want to call it health care, and we use that term. Well, this is health care. It's health care. We're providing health care. We're providing health insurance. Health care is what doctors, nurses, and administrative staff does. Health care is not your insurance provider. Your insurance is simply insurance, and we need to delineate the two and make sure that we're attacking both of those from an overall perspective. And regulations is one of the biggest issues. We have a 10-to-1, 9-to-1 administrator to doctor/nurse professional that's added in our actual healthcare industry. This is driving up the overall cost, and that's because our regulations have created an environment that make it very difficult for doctors to be doctors and nurses to be nurses, and so they have to hire additional overhead. If we had that kind of overhead in standard businesses around our country, our businesses would never survive. So we need to look at that as an overall problem for healthcare and look at ways that we can reduce that impact to them so that doctors can get back to being doctors, nurses can get back to being nurses, and that our insurance environment, including Medicaid and whatever else that we have on as an insurance, is segregated, and we can look at that from a perspective. But as long as Obamacare is the law of the land, then you have to consider, what are you being forced to do?
Yeah.
You have to choose what you feel like is the right move. Personally, looking at the expansion, the Medicaid expansion, I still think it's creating a long-term dependency and debt that we as Arkansans can't afford, and I think it's a situation that we probably should not have gotten ourselves into.
Yeah. Scott Richardson, I've got one more question for you, sir.
Sure.
The environment in Little Rock is, these are my words, these are my feelings, that it's pretty toxic. You've got a division within the Republican Party right now. You have some people in the leadership that demand absolute fealty and loyalty, and they want you to, raise taxes. They want you to vote to do these things that are not in the Republican Party platform. And then there's others that are resisting. Some that resist get primary opponents, get targeted by, people in leadership. Are you worried at all that if you get elected and you go down to Little Rock that you're going to change and you're going to, not do what you campaign on doing? Are you worried about that at all?
It's a good question. It's a valid question. We as people, we have our understanding of the way things exist. Occasionally, those ideas may get adjusted based on additional information. The reality is, I have done my research. I have my understanding of the way things are, and it would take a significant amount to make me adjust what I believe and what I feel. To say outright that right at the top of the point, without having the insight that a lot of our legislators have, that I'm not gonna make any changes or any adjustments to my feelings, is kind of hard to do. But at the same time, I have an understanding that we have to make some changes at our state government level. I'm not concerned about pressure. The reality is I'm not getting into this race under anybody's bidding other than my own. I'm making this choice myself because we need to make some adjustments. If the people of this district feel like that I'm not making adjustments that they need, then they're going to vote somebody else in. If I see some establishment pushing for changes in my district, some of the established Republicans, then we can address that at that point. At this stage, if I win, if I lose, after I've won, at least I've had an opportunity to inflict some change. At least I've had an opportunity to start things going in the right direction. I'm not a career politician. I'm doing this for a specific purpose. If I am able to make a few changes and move things in the right direction and mostly educate our voters so that more voters take an active stance in the political process, then we win as a group. Wow. So I'm good with that.
That's a great attitude to have. Scott Richardson, thank you so much for coming on the program. I really appreciate your answers and your careful thought on these issues. You are up to speed. You do seem like you know exactly what you believe, and I can't wait to do another interview again sometime.
I appreciate the opportunity. I'll come back anytime.
All righty. Folks, we're going to take a break. When we come back, I'm going to remind you who Mr. Richardson here is challenging. Dan Douglas, back in a minute.